The word spread through Hatchet Creek the way all desperate words did, low and fast, mouth to ear, pity trailing behind it like smoke. Beatrice Lund heard it at the dry goods counter on a Tuesday morning. Mabel Pryor said it plainly, the way she said all things. Abel Hartley had stood up at the feed store and announced he needed a wife by Friday or the bank would take the Hartley range. Every acre, every head. The house his father built with river stone and felled pine, gone by Monday if a man couldn't show a settled household. Beatrice set down the spool of thread she could not afford. She had $7.40 to her name. She had 2 children, Clara, age 9, grave-eyed and steady, and age 6, who still reached for a father who would not come back. She had the room above the milliner's, paid through the end of the week. After that she had nothing but the road. Thomas Lund had died of fever in February. He had left her love and 2 children and a stack of debts she had not known existed. She had sold the wagon. She had sold his tools. She had taken in mending until her fingers cracked at the knuckles, and still the numbers did not work. She stood at that counter and did arithmetic she had never wanted to do. A roof, a kitchen, a yard where Finn could run, a place that was not charity, not a stranger's floor, not the hollow pity in Mabel Pryor's eyes. She asked where Abel Hartley was. She found him at the livery, working a harness he didn't need to work, just keeping his hands moving the way men did when fear had no other place to go. He was taller than she remembered. She had seen him at church, at the mill, never closely. His face was weathered the color of old saddle leather. His jaw was set hard. He looked like a man braced for a blow. "Mr. Hartley," she said. He turned. The surprise on his face was brief and honest. "Mrs. Lund." He removed his hat. "I'm sorry about your husband." "Thank you." She did not let that linger. "I heard what you said at the feed store." His jaw tightened. He looked at the harness in his hands. "Word gets around." "It does." She kept her voice level, because her heart was not level and she could not afford to show it. "I have 2 children and no home after Sunday. You have a home and need a wife. I'm not a foolish woman, Mr. Hartley. I know what you're asking for is legal and practical, not anything else. But I'd need it understood that I come as a mother first. My children are part of any arrangement." He was quiet a long moment. She watched him think. She respected that he thought instead of speaking fast. "I know you've got the children," he said. "Clara and the boy." "Finn." "Finn." He nodded once, like he was filing the name somewhere safe. "Mrs. Lund, I won't pretend this is a fine offer. The ranch is in trouble. There's work to it. Hard work." "I'm not afraid of work." He looked at her then, really looked, the way a man looks when he's trying to know whether something is true. She held still and let him look, because she was not hiding anything. She was tired and afraid and determined, and if he could not see that clearly, then he was not the kind of man she needed to stake her children's lives on. "No," he said slowly, "I don't suppose you are." "Then we understand each other." He put his hat back on. "Judge Alderman does a civil ceremony. I can have it arranged for Thursday." "Thursday," she agreed. She walked back to the milliner's with steady steps and cried once, quietly, in the room above the shop, while Clara and Finn were at the neighbor's. She cried for Thomas. She cried because this was not the life she had planned. Then she dried her face and began to fold what little they owned into 2 flour sacks, because crying was a thing you did and then you finished. The ceremony was 12 minutes. Judge Alderman had a cold and his voice was thick, but the words were legal and she said them clearly, looking at Abel Hartley's profile rather than his eyes, because she was not ready for his eyes yet. He slid a ring onto her finger, plain silver, size too large, held on by the cold. She did not ask whose it had been. Finn shook Abel's hand with great seriousness. Clara watched the man the way she watched everything, measuring, withholding judgment until she had sufficient evidence. The drive out to the Hartley ranch took the better part of an hour. The wagon rolled through land going gold and spare as autumn settled. Abel pointed out the fence lines, the creek, the upper pasture, the way the cottonwoods marked where water ran. He spoke about the land the way some men spoke about kin, with a quiet ferocity underneath the plain words. She listened. She began to understand what he stood to lose. The house was stone and pine, as she'd heard, low-roofed and solid, built by a man who intended it to last. It smelled of wood smoke and leather, and the particular loneliness of a place where one person had been rattling around too long alone. The kitchen was functional and cold. The curtains were flour sacks. The table was good. She put her flour sacks down and looked at the kitchen and thought, I can work with this. Clara found the curtains wanting and said so. Abel blinked at her. Then, unexpectedly, his mouth twitched. I expect you're right, he said. Finn discovered a barn cat and forgot about everything else. The first week was careful, polite as strangers at a funeral. Abel rose before light and came in after dark, and took his meals without complaint, and said thank you with the regularity of a man who had been raised to it. Beatrice cooked from what the larder held, not much, but she had stretched nothing into something before. She learned the stove's temper. She banked the fire right each night. He noticed. She could see him noticing, though he said little. She found the account books on Saturday. She had not gone looking, but she had been straightening his desk for the lamp, and there they were, open. She did not mean to read them. She read them. The numbers were worse than she'd imagined. The banknote was 3 months past due. Crawford's Territorial Bank had written twice. The cattle count was down after a bad spring sickness in the herd. The pasture lease in the upper valley had lapsed, and a man named Sutter had made an offer on it that Abel had refused because taking it meant reducing the herd below the number the loan required. She closed the book carefully. She sat with what she knew. At supper she said, the upper pasture lease. He went still. If you let Sutter have it, you lose the cattle count the bank requires, but if you hold it, the lease payment comes due December 1st, and you haven't got it. A long silence. You read the books. They were open. I won't apologize for understanding what I've walked into. She met his eyes directly. I want to help, not because it's my duty, because those children are sleeping under this roof, and I'd like them to keep sleeping under it. He put down his fork. She thought for a moment she had overstepped, that the privacy of it would make him cold. Instead, he rubbed his hand over his jaw and said, roughly, I don't know how to solve it. I've been turning it for 2 months. Then let's turn it together. That was the night the worriness began to thaw. He showed her the full accounts. She showed him the places she'd seen savings, the feed supplier charging 10 cents above the mill in Grumby, the seed order that could be halved if they kitchen gardened more aggressively. Small things, but money was small things added up. He listened to her the way men rarely listened, without bracing against her words, without waiting for her to finish, so he could explain why she was wrong. You're sharp, he said, not like a compliment, like an observation, like he was simply noting a fact about the world. I had to be, she said. The second week the cold broke briefly and she hung proper curtains, cloth she'd found folded in the cedar chest in the spare room, blue cotton, clean. She hung them without asking. He came in that evening and looked at the windows for a long moment. My mother's, he said. I can take them down. No. He set his hat on its peg. No, they look right. The children found him slowly. Finn first, because Finn had no patience for caution and brought Abel a frog in his hat one morning, and seemed to think this was a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Abel held the hat and regarded the frog with grave attention, and asked Finn what its name was. Finn said Gerald. Abel said that was a fine name for a frog. After that Finn followed him to the barn most mornings. Clara took longer, but one evening Abel sat down with the ledger and Clara, who had been watching the numbers over his shoulder for 3 nights running, said quietly, "You made an error in column 4. He checked. He had. He handed her the pencil. Beatrice saw that from the doorway and felt something move in her chest she had no name for yet. The letter from Crawford's Territorial Bank arrived on a Wednesday. The bank agent, a man named Holt, would be arriving Friday morning. If the account was not settled or a satisfactory payment arrangement had not been demonstrated, foreclosure proceedings would begin. Abel read it at the table, set it down. His face was stone. "We have 48 hours, Beatrice said. "There's no 48 hours solution." There might be. She had been thinking since she read those books. She had been thinking hard. "Your neighbor Prentice. He's been wanting the water rights to the East Creek draw for 3 years. You told me yourself. You refused because it felt like giving ground." "It is giving ground. It's giving 3 acres of creek draw you barely use, for enough cash to make a partial payment and show Holt a working household and a going concern." She laid both hands on the table. "Abel, you need to show him a ranch with a future, not a man holding on alone. You have that now. Let me help you make that case." He looked at her for a long time. Something moved in his face she couldn't quite read, something that was not just the weight of the ranch. "You'd stand in front of a bank agent and argue for this place." "I'd stand in front of anyone," she said. "This is my home now." The words came out before she had decided to say them. She felt the truth of them at the same moment he heard them. She did not take them back. Friday came raw and grey. Prentice had agreed, the night before, to pay $300 for the creek draw rights, payable at the bank in the morning. It was enough to cover the arrears. Not enough to buy easy breathing, but enough to demonstrate a payment made and a household running. Holt arrived at 9. He was not a cruel man. Beatrice could see that within the first minute. He was a careful man, a bank man, and careful bank men were not always kind, but they did follow evidence. She served coffee. She set the account books on the table, already tabulated, the Prentice payment receipt on top. Abel spoke. She let him speak first because it was his land, his father's land, his name on the deed. But when Holt began to talk about insufficient demonstration of ongoing enterprise, she said, "Mr. Holt." Both men looked at her. "I have been keeping this household's accounts for the past 2 weeks. I can show you the cost reductions we've implemented, the kitchen garden expansion we've planned for spring, and the revised feed costs. I can also show you a letter from the Granby Cattlemen's Cooperative confirming Mr. Hotley's herd is registered for the spring market at current value." She placed the papers in front of him, one by one, in order. "This ranch is not failing. It is recovering. There is a difference." Holt read. He was quiet a long time. Abel's hand under the table found hers. She was not sure he knew he'd done it. She did not pull away. Holt cleared his throat. "A payment arrangement can be considered," he said, "provided the December installment is met." He left at 10:30. The door closed. Beatrice stood still and let her shoulders come down from where they'd been, somewhere up around her ears, for 2 days. Abel turned to her. He looked stripped of something, all the braced against everything gone, just the man underneath it. "That letter from the cooperative," he said. "I didn't write that. I wrote it. You're a registered member. Everything in it is true." He shook his head slowly, not in anger, something else entirely. "Beatrice." It was the first time he had said her name like that, like it meant something particular. "It's your land," she said. "I wasn't going to let them take it." He was quiet. Then, "It's our land, if you'll have it that way." She looked at him, this man she had married for a roof, for her children, for survival, and she saw what had been growing in these 2 weeks. The way he listened, the way he held Finn's frog hat with seriousness, the way he'd handed Clara the pencil without a second thought, the way his hand had found hers under the table without him knowing. She had not planned to feel anything. She had planned to survive. But the heart doesn't ask permission, and she had stopped negotiating with hers 3 days ago. "I'll have it that way," she said. Clara found them that evening at the kitchen table, heads together over the spring planting figures, Finn asleep against Abel's arm like he'd always belonged there. She looked at them for a moment, then she went to the cupboard and got out the 4 plates without being asked. Winter came on hard and clean that year over the Hartley range. The cattle came through. The December payment was made on time. The blue curtains stayed in the windows, and in the evenings the lamp burned late, because there was always something to talk about: the accounts, the children's schooling, the fence that needed mending, the stars that came out big and cold over the upper pasture. Some nights they talked about Thomas. She told Abel what he had been: a good man, a loving one, taken too fast. Abel listened without jealousy, without any need to be the only story she carried. That was when she knew, if she hadn't known already. By the first hard frost she was not surviving. She was home. The children were fed and settled and loved, and the man across the table from her looked up from the ledger sometimes just to look at her, the way people look at things they are glad to have. She had said yes for her children. She had meant it for survival. What grew from it was something else, unhurried, plain as good stone, warm as the kitchen fire that never went out. She would not have chosen it this way if she'd been able to choose. But she was glad down to the marrow of her that had come.